I have a feeling this is going to be the one episode with Angelo and I that we're going to enjoy the most this season, and it's going to be talking about running backs.
I'd agree with you. Yeah, 100%.
So we're going to get right to the middle of it. No intro, no nothing, because we got lots to talk about. So, what do you think about the state of the running back position in the NFL, as well as this class?
That's a great question. I think running backs are kind of back, right? I think
Oh
they're
yeah,
becoming a significant part of an offense's identity again. You have young guys like Robinson and Gibbs and Achane on a lesser scale, and then you have your veterans like Barkley and Henry that are playing at a high level, and we didn't even see Christian McCaffrey this year, right? So
but we saw James Cook.
yeah, exactly. Like those are like that's
Yeah,
another one too. I mean, he says he wants 15 mil. I mean, dude, he might get it. He
yeah,
might get 15 mil. With the way he's playing, but I mean that's an interesting and Bucky Irving too. Like he's a
yeah,
fourth one for crying out loud. And so we're kind of seeing this resurgence of the position, and I think it's partially due to how defenses are playing. But also too, there's been a good influx in talent. Like Gibbs and Robinson are probably the best duo to come out in a pretty long time. From a first round basis, right? Both were top 12 picks. And both are, all pro caliber players at this point in their career. And I think that's an interesting part of what the landscape looks like now. And we kind of look at too, kind of a changing of the guard of the guys who were like secondary, tertiary options. Like some of those guys are gonna kind of, I would say, like sift away. In terms of running back jobs, I think we have the Bears, Cowboys, Commanders, Chiefs, Raiders, Chargers, and Steelers as like primary jobs. We're looking at guys who can see 17 plus, 18 plus touches a game. And that's a pretty good. That's about what, a third of the league, probably,
yeah.
maybe a little less.
And you might be able to throw in the Browns with that,
Yeah,
depending on
that
what
would.
they do. And yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, yeah. So we're looking at another team in the Browns where, you're gonna get Nick Chubb if he's if he turns over, I would say, and kind of he's in the last stage of his career anyways. I mean, that's another spot where it's, look, 18, 20 touches are open. And that's a big deal when we're talking about this particular class, because this is the class for that turnover to happen with.
yeah,
We have so many guys. I mean, I posted, I have, 8 guys right now that are in the 70th percentile or higher in my film charting from the last 6-7 years, and it's a big number.
yeah.
So I think that's an interesting part of this class is we have guys that are not just good talents, but guys who are potential starting caliber talents that are entering the league.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I have somewhere between 23 to 25 players that I think within a couple of years could be no worse than Rashad White type contributors with a lead guy, leading the way. And then, I would say that there's probably half of those guys, if they stay healthy and get the right opportunity, could emerge as the lead guy in that mix. And
Yeah.
then half of that half are guys that you probably will expect to be the lead guy barring injury. And we know that the retention rate and all the things that happen with turnover and injuries and knuckleheadedness and things like that will thin the herd. But, that's just the nature of the beast. But it is one of those things that running back, I mean, we can look at it, and everyone always wants a template. What's the template? What's a running back? What does a running back look like these days? And I think the answer is whatever is successful, and it's always been that way, but it's just pronounced even more because we just talked about James Cook and Devon Achane and Bucky Irving, but then you still got Derrick Henry on the exact opposite end, Saquon Barkley and Nick Chubb, if Chubb somehow is healthy and still has a little bit of that left, not far behind Derrick Henry in terms of size, speed, strength type of things. And then you got the guys in between, or the role players who can kind of do it all. Josh Jacobs, people have written off for dead it seems like after his second year in the league, and he was just happened to be one of the top 5 to 6 running backs in Green Bay's system, without a doubt. Aaron Jones was still running pretty strong when he was healthy. Joe Mixon, people were leaving for dead,
Right.
and he, maybe he's got too much fight in him, but he's got some fight left in him. So it's, and then even guys like Chuba Hubbard who emerged,
Right.
and we've talked about his emergence over the years. So this is this class has that wide of a range of talent. So we're going to explore that wide of a range, and the big issue isn't something that you've brought up, is are there going to be enough spots to really accommodate some of these guys in the back half of that top 20 to top 25, whether they're free agents or late round picks? Will they ever even get a chance without a major injury? And because how many CJ Andersons, how many Spencer Ware situations, how many Isaiah Crowell situations, if we go that far back, are there really every year? And the answer is not very much. For every Priest Holmes, there's dozens of guys who might have been able to at least get an opportunity like Priest Holmes and done pretty well, even if they didn't do Priest Holmes well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I actually just went back recently and looked at kind of the data on how many touches per game does a first rounder get compared to a fourth rounder since like 2019. Went back and looked at that since when I started charting players. First rounders receive about 18 touches a game as a rookie. Second rounders 12 touches, third rounders 10, fourth rounders 7 touches, and it just kind of goes down from there. So if you're a fourth rounder and you're receiving 7 opportunities a game to touch the ball, that's not a lot of opportunity in terms of scoring fantasy points and making a name for yourself, but that's not a great kind of outlook on the future of that player's career trajectory, right? Like Bucky Irving was an interesting case because Bucky Irving this past year had like just under 15 touches a game.
Yeah,
rarely ever happens from fourth round backs, right? That's basically double the average back in that same position in terms of draft. So
now here's a question for you: how far back did you go when you looked at those touches per game? Was it in recent years, like during our cover 2 or pre-cover 2 era of pass happy offenses?
2019 was I did it. I usually align everything like all the stats I look at from when I've been charting players because I just have way more data collected on that. So that's when I went back and looked. So I thought it was really interesting. But I mean, like if you look at, first rounders, if you're a first rounder, this is actually really funny. The first rounder with the least amount of touches per game was Travis Etienne with 15.
Yeah.
And everybody else is, like we're talking Bijan was 16, Gibbs was just under 16, and then Najee Harris had 22 touches a game, Josh Jacobs had 20 touches a game as a rookie. And so biggest thing is if we'll talk about him later, but Ashton Jeanty's in for a hefty workload.
Yeah.
And a ton of early career opportunity, and that's the big thing is we're looking at like running back is the shelf life is short, and we all know that. So we're looking at guys who can get a ton of opportunity early, but also too, if the guys are in the third and fourth round and we still like them, we have to look at places that don't have a ton of competition.
Yeah,
because that's a big deal. Like Tyrone Tracy last year with the Giants, his only competition's Devin Singletary, who is a middle tier to slightly maybe below average NFL talent. So in that case, you can jump a guy like that. And that's a big deal when we're looking at this class in particular, the guys that are, like you said, there's between 8 and 12 guys that are, potential starting caliber dudes. And that's a pretty big number for one class.
For sure. And the reason I asked about the year was that the one thing that will be interesting to see moving forward is if we're seeing this year, as like the past 2 years, I would say we're winning, and really the past 2.5 were the years where we started to see the worm turn with running backs because of the offensive adjustments. So the interesting thing will be is whether that from 2019 through say 2022, we're really looking at a lot of data that shows, hey, if you're a fourth round pick, you're not much of a priority because the passing offense is here to stay. And then now that we've seen more placed on the ground game with some of the offensive adjustments since 2022, you'd wonder if maybe we might see maybe those fourth round numbers start to rise a little bit if it continues to swing in the direction that we've seen. We're not yet to see a trend. It's just something that'll be interesting. So if we start talking about the fourth round, which I think is a great point, that you're probably going to see a lot less. But if we suddenly see 2 or 3 players from like rounds 4 to 6 who are getting big time carries, we can attribute that to probably the change in the offensive mindset, and that's kind of taking over, and that the trend is starting to reverse itself. But that's the fun part about looking at the data, is we can kind of say, okay, what are the points that might change the data, so that we can figure out whether we're going to be what we can do in the coming years. So, all right, so let's start this way. Whose game do you think is least likely to need a specific landing spot to thrive when it comes to this guy? You can plug him in a variety of places, maybe not everywhere, but there's an based on what he does well, even if it's not as well-rounded of a game as what people might think the question is asking for, you might say, because of the way the league is, either he's well-rounded enough, or he does these 2 to 3 things, or even this one thing so well, wherever he's going to go, he's going to thrive.
Sure. I think because of the physical nature of what we're kind of seeing up front, and also too with running backs, we're looking at guys who kind of bring that emotional element to an offense. I think it's Cam Scatterbo.
Okay.
I think for me, he's the one guy, in that Jamal Williams, David Montgomery archetype that can just play anywhere because of the emotional element they bring to an offense, right? He's an energy giver, down to down. He's someone that no one's going to want to tackle. He's a cold weather ball player, right? So I think if you're looking at a guy that can kind of just plug and play anywhere, does he have a super high ceiling? No, probably not. But he's going to have a long career like Dave Montgomery has, Jamal Williams, and guys in that similar caliber and talent category. Because I think those type of players are always useful in the NFL offense, especially when it gets cold and you're asked to win a playoff game in Philadelphia in 6 inches of snow. Yeah. Like, that's the type of guys that you need on an offense. Like, you can't just have your Devon A. Chains all day and your James Cooks. Like, those guys are great, but you need that other archetype of back, like we see with the Detroit Lions, obviously a good balance, but that's even a little bit different because Jahmyr Gibbs' talent caliber is so high. He's a blue chip guy, so those guys are really, really rare. Those guys are unicorns in a sense, him, Bajan, and others, so you can't really take those guys and take them into account. But that tier down, the A-Chains, the Cooks, they need a second guy in order for them to be at their very best. And I think Cam Scatterbo is that second guy that can really provide value to the NFL offense from an emotional and also a field of play standpoint, because I do think he's a pretty good player. He does a lot of really good things with his feet. He's a reliable pass catcher, great balance post-contact and all different contact types as well, handles those really well. And just one of those guys that you want to keep on the field. And the pass protection stuff's the one thing I think he needs to clean up. And that's more not because of lack of effort, just
definitely
not. It's just lack of technical acumen.
Yep.
And once you get in the RB room with a professional coach and you clean that stuff up, you're good to go. But a guy like him for me is who I'm looking at as a pretty scheme diverse running back, and I think he's going to probably do quite well. Hopefully he doesn't fall to the 4th round, but anything can happen.
Sure.
For you, who do you got?
I'm going with Quinshon Judkins. I'm a fan. Okay. I think that when you look at what he did both at Ole Miss and Ohio State, he's already on his way as a pass protector. He's got elements of a good strike. He can get beaten to the punch a little bit, but I love his footwork. and his feet and hips. He's got the mobile hips and the good footwork. He can explode out of cuts. He creates in broken situations well with patience and efficiency. I think he has good spatial awareness, and that he has maturing skills with using pace. And he uses his hips and feet well for contact balance. So he's that guy that, like, if you need a Cam Scatterboot type to be your second back, your B back, he can be that. But there's a good chance he could be your A back too. And so to me, when I watch him, even as a receiver, he's not, he's not Aaron Jones, as a route runner or even as a pass catcher, but he can catch the leaks. He can do the screen game. He can give you one-on-ones against linebackers, and he's got some footwork skills to get past those guys one-on-one. And I think the burst is fine. I think that there was concerns about whether or not
overblown a little bit.
Yeah, I think they're a little overblown. But I think that he definitely can. When you can get around the short corner against Alabama, or you can get around the short corner against some of these teams with high-end athletes, the short corner is harder to get around than the far side corner in terms of just acceleration. Long speed, you can use a little bit of that long speed to kick in, depending on how far to the far side corner you're going. But I think he's a good problem solver, even against the run blitz. He's efficient. So I just think he's a conceptually smart back. The danger would be for people is going, oh no, we have another Trey Sermon situation where Trey Sermon is not as fast as we thought he was, and he's not, and he overthinks things. And is there a risk that can happen with backs? Absolutely. But I don't think we're going to see Quinshad Judkins being put in the same category explosion-wise as an athlete as Trey Sermon.
No, I agree. And I remember with Sermon coming out, just the fit was really bizarre. And that was the thing too. That can really neuter your career if you're someone who's, for Sermon in particular, like he was in my opinion, he was a better gap runner than a zone runner. And then he goes to a very zone heavy scheme and doesn't see any success.
Yeah. And
that's tough because if you're in a zone heavy scheme and you're a poor accelerator, well then good luck.
Yeah.
Because that's not really going to work if you can just run inside zone.
And especially with Shanahan's offense, where he wanted to use guys in a way where just hit that thing, where right. It was, he didn't want the multiple choice guys. He wanted the hammers, because he didn't want Devonta Freeman, who was more of a multiple choice, quick twitch kind of guy. He wanted Coleman, but when Coleman couldn't run his scheme, the coaches said, "Come on, let's put Devonta in there until Tevin got better." But you're right. I mean, it all around was a mismatch.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. So with that in mind, who is someone that you look at and you say, okay, they're gonna need a strong fit to thrive right away. Like, this is someone you look at and you go, look, I see the talent, but it's gonna be a really good match for that to happen, like this year or next.
That's a good question. I would say I was Caleb Johnson. For me, and we just talked about this a little bit just with Sermon. Obviously, Caleb Johnson's a plus athlete compared to Sermon is, but zone runners are extremely feel-based, right? Everything hinges on cohesiveness up front, marrying their movement and through contact tools with just the good sound down-to-down blocking. If he doesn't land in a scheme that gives him that, he is going to be in trouble, because behind the line of scrimmage, he can't create very much. And that is where he has issues. So if you get him going north-south, if you give him a little bit of a runway in an alley, he can make things happen. I like his movement tools for what he brings to the table as an accelerator. He's good enough through contact, but it's kind of similar to Rashad Penny, right? Similar style runner where if they get 3, 4, 5 steps of ground, then they can make things happen. But if they're getting hit at or behind the line of scrimmage, they're not creative enough to get out of those situations. Like even guys like David Montgomery, who that's something he does well, is he can get out of those situations and get you 3, 4, 5 yards sometimes, hitting the backfield, right? We saw it even in Chicago with Montgomery. That's not who Caleb Johnson is. I think he can be a starting caliber plus back in the league if he lands in a good zone heavy fit with a sound offensive mind. If he doesn't, that's going to be kind of tough. I think it's going to be tougher for him early career to really be the explosive back that we saw at Iowa.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I believe that he will be one of those guys that will be such an obvious decision among scouts that scouts will be like, look, if we want to run OZ, run outside zone, wide zone, this is the guy we want to get. This guy is going to marry to our scheme very well, but that's what we want. That's what we're getting him for. If you're going to change it up, it's going to be a problem, you know. So I agree with you. I don't have anything more to add. I think that was terrific analysis just on its own part. So with that said, then who's someone that you feel has more promise later than substance right now?
Ooh. I would say probably Ollie Gordon II.
Okay.
I think the highs are great, especially for his size. I think if you saw what he did in 2023, it's impressive. I think that was a big year for him. I mean, gosh, he had over 2,200, I think, total yards. But the big thing for him is the down-to-down consistency, right? If that doesn't improve, he becomes A.J. Dillon rather than Najee Harris. And that's a difficult thing. If you can't get a big back like that to be consistent down to down and to be the hammer that you need and to provide value as a pass catcher, well, then he's just going to be another, secondary, tertiary option, just a guy. But he's talented. He has good talent. I actually really like his cognitive skill set in the open field and open spaces. And that's where he works really well. If you can get him to the second level, yeah, if you saw him at the Senior Bowl, he looks the part. Like that guy looks like he's an NFL running back.
Sure.
And also too, he won running back of the week for his team at the Senior Bowl. So he played pretty well there. And I think one thing I saw too, I was trying to watch as much as the practice as I possibly could, is the second level stuff really shined. Like, he's just a good decision maker there, but I think the decision making behind the line of scrimmage is where he struggles.
Yeah.
And if he cleans that up, he could have a long, successful career, right? I think Najee Harris he's had 1,000 yards every single year he's been in the league. But Najee Harris is also a first rounder who's afforded 22 opportunities from the jump to figure that thing out. I don't know if Ollie Gordon gets that. I think Ollie Gordon right now is probably a fringe third, fourth rounder for most people. But if he has a good combine and a good pre-draft process, if he goes in the second round, that's a sweet spot for a guy like that because you need opportunity. He's a volume-based back, right? This isn't one of those guys. He's not Caleb Johnson where he can take it 65 on an outside zone run. It's not who he is. So he's going to be someone that provides you value in the red zone potentially, and also too just in the workload of the game.
Yeah, like early in his career, Miles Sanders sounds like the guy you're just describing because workout warrior, definitely looks the part, physically is the part, and when you get him in the open field, the natural feel for how to work in the second level could be. There were times that was there. You wanted him in that space, and I think with Ollie Gordon, you watch him in the open space, and it's very natural for him. He makes it look very natural, at least. He has very good, just like you said, cognitive skills. Micro movements, the ability to really just kind of adjust in efficient ways to maximize that acceleration, strength, and speed. And then you get him behind the line of scrimmage, and it's like, he runs to open space rather than running to how the scheme develops. And you can usually tell that when a guy's trying to just get to the open space, he's either not understanding how the scheme works or he's just ignoring how the scheme works because he thinks he can out-athlete people. And that's where people get into trouble. So I think that's a great nomination. I'll add to the list Donovan Edwards. I still like Donovan Edwards at Michigan. And when I watch him play, I think gap scheme. Like, that would be just let him hit it. Let him hit it and be physical and use that strength. And if you can get him out in space on top of that, maybe occasionally, you can run the wheel route. You can give him a little screen. You can put him in an RPO, and he's going to catch the ball and he's going to let it fly. Now the thing is the guys he reminds me of, there are two ends of the equation. They're the same, two sides of the same coin. If you want the guy who was probably overhyped because they thought he was all everything because of that athletic ability, that speed, but they overlooked the contact balance, the savvy, and as a zone runner they couldn't really do, and so he had to use him more as a gap player in an era where gap wasn't really popular, was Darren McFadden. Like, Darren McFadden, I would joke, when he made it to the Cowboys, when he finally got there, and he had that big year with that all-world offensive line, there were still plays where he literally got mid-hole and looked around, like, figuring out where he was going. Like, you would joke that he still was lost in the middle.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, it was one of those things with McFadden where it was, it's just like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah, he looked like he and with that line being as good as it was, I never saw anything like it where it looked like a running back could stop mid-hole and ask for directions and then keep going. Like, that was literally, I mean, that was almost what it felt like. But on the other end of the spectrum is a player that I think Donovan Edwards is more physically like, because McFadden, when I watched him, I remember I watched that guy almost as much as any player I've ever watched was McFadden, because everyone said how awesome he was, and I kept watching him get 10-yard head starts from the eye heading downhill, or to the pistol heading downhill through a crease and barreling into a flat-footed safety, and the safety drops his pads. That's all he does. He's flat-footed, drops his pads, and McFadden bounces backward. And I'm like, this guy is not the monster everybody's making him out to be. When you can't win you can't even stalemate a safety with that head start down the hill. I think there's him, Marlon Mack, and I think maybe one other player I've studied. Yeah, him and Marlon Mack and one other player I've studied are guys that I could say failed that test in the 20 years I've been doing this and still managed to have at least one good season, 1,000-yard season. So, McFadden's that end. But the other end of that spectrum is a big, strong, fast back who probably was better catching the football than he was as a nuanced runner. Still needed to work on that. And he ended up in Arizona and got paired with Chris Johnson, who he said taught him a lot about the nuances of running zone. And David Johnson did pretty darn well, in his career for a spurt. He was one of the better producers in the league. And I think Donovan Edwards isn't likely to turn into David Johnson, but there's enough skills there that you could go, wow, this guy could carve out a role. He just may need to get his bearings a little bit more, because I watched Khalil Mullings, and there was a part of me when I first saw it at first blush and didn't really study him. I saw a few plays, or I looked at some highlights just before I even got close, months ago, and I go, oh, Donovan Edwards lost out to a fullback, and
no, you are 100% right. I mean, when I watched Donovan Edwards 2 years ago,
yeah,
I was like, oh man, this guy might be a second round pick. He's legit. He just didn't get better. And then the Khalil Mullings thing, I'm like, okay, Donovan Edwards he offers you more down to down than Mullings does. But Mullings is just a tough SOB.
Yes, Mullings comes from the James Conner school of running backs. He might not be the valedictorian, but he certainly is not failing.
He's ready to hit somebody. It's like when I watched Benny Snell. Wait, this guy's not that good, but holy cow, he is a mean MFer, right?
Yeah, he could play in the league, I think. He's gonna have a role, but Edwards has that upside that hasn't been tapped, and I agree. And so when you look at him, I go, I wouldn't be surprised if he winds up on a team, it's like a fifth, sixth round pick, and the team fits him really well, and they have a really good offensive line. It's like a 49ers type of situation with Elijah Mitchell, where it's kind of like you didn't expect it from Elijah Mitchell. Maybe the public didn't, and they didn't think of him as being good. And then everybody's telling him how good he's been with the fit with what they're asking him to do, and now everybody's was on top of him. I think Edwards, people are like soured on him, and then he could wind up in a scenario like that where they go, look, all you got to do is this and this, and then we'll keep you keep growing your game, kid. And I think that there's something there with him that could be untapped. And considering that his great season, he was playing on a partially torn quad, is another thing where you just go, okay, this is a tough dude and a good athlete who's got some running back skills. It's just very specific. So
Yeah.
Okay. So who are the best receiving backs? You name two or three if you want. You can focus on one, whatever you want to do.
Sure. I have three guys that I think are kind of above the rest, and I think all these guys might be potential day 3 dudes.
Okay.
One's Brashard Smith. We've
Yeah.
talked about him at length. His skill set as a pure receiver really shows up. You can detach him from the formation, and he can win on double moves. He can win on the boundary. He can win the low red zone with his feet. I mean, he's just one of those really interesting prospects because he plays running back for 1 year, has 1,300 plus yards, and beginning of this season, you can tell he didn't really know what he was doing.
Yeah.
Like he was just kind of out there just trying to be an athlete. But then as you got closer and closer to the bowl games, the Clemson game was interesting because when I watched that one, he took what was given to him. And that was really encouraging. And then when you look at the Senior Bowl as well that week and you watch the practices, and that's what impressed me was it wasn't like he was trying to hit a home run every time. But as a pure receiver, there might not be a better receiving back in this class just because of the diversity he has, right? He can run angle routes, option routes, beat backers on wheels with ease with his ability as an accelerator. And just the curved linear stuff, too, makes him really hard to cover if you're a safety on him. So that's kind of the stuff with Smith that I'm like, okay, if he gets in the right system, he could very well be one of the better backs in this cycle. I have an over 70th percentile talent grade on him just because the ceiling is really high. If he can kind of grasp the finer conceptual details of playing the running back position, he'll offer value immediately as a kick returner. Then he can offer value immediately as a receiver. And then if you kind of just keep stepping that up, you might have someone that finds his way into a starting role.
Yeah.
And then the second guy for me was the Quinn Allen.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Just one of those guys that kind of like a more, I would say, a tougher version of Rachaad White. Not as good as an athlete, though. And for me, it's just the ease in which he can catch the football, really good in pass protection, keeps the quarterback clean, tough in the low red zone. But as a receiver, he's going to be one of those reliable, potential Kenneth Gainwell type guys, right? That can provide value there. And then the last guy is one of the guys I'm really excited about in this class that's just really young and has some of the raw tools you want. Jaden Blue out of Texas.
Sure.
I think for him, it's kind of in a similar vein of Brashard Smith, not as impactful, I would say, as a receiver from a total sense, but has some of the similar skills in terms of being a really, really good accelerator and being able to run away from people, but also to throttle down and run some of the option routes, run angle routes and beat backers with ease and take screens 60, 70 yards. I mean, that's kind of who he is, but for him, it's kind of similar to how I saw Justice Hill coming out of Oklahoma State.
Oh yeah,
just a similar caliber back. I think he might be a touch above Hill in terms of just total talent because I think there's a lot there with Blue that just hasn't been tapped into. But for me, it's can he get into a system that can really help him flourish 2-3 years down the road and just keep him on a roster and just keep feeding him more and more and more. And then he could potentially be a guy who's a secondary option.
Nice. I love him. I'll start with Brashard Smith as well. Obviously, he had my top receiving back grade in this class for all the things you mentioned, and the fact that when you can still see him as a receiver running 3-step breaks with weight drop, and you can do it against cornerbacks. You're not. That's a different grade of cornerback you're going to be seeing in the NFL, and you probably won't have to see them, but you're going to win against safeties. And the fact that the likelihood of him getting on the field, I think, is pretty high early on, because when you take a guy who was a kind of a okay, let's give you a shot at running back at Miami for a few touches a game last year or 2 years ago, and then this year suddenly you're seeing a guy who is learning how to block. And they used him a little bit at Miami, and he didn't know what he was doing. And suddenly you see him at SMU, and he's cut blocking defensive ends. He's cut blocking A-gap linebackers, and he's doing it right. He's doing it well. You're seeing maturity with decision-making in the red zone, which is things that guys who people get overhyped about. Ollie Gordon is a good example of a guy who you don't know whether you're going to get the red zone maturity out of him from play to play. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. With Brashard Smith, even though he's done this 1 year, I feel like, yeah, I'm seeing the maturity. Like, if he's learning that quickly, the details that oftentimes separate starters from good college backs, that's promising. Now, there's things he's still got to, like you said, he's got to work on. Like, I laugh because, he leans on that spin like he's Rashad Mendenhall. He leans on that thing way too much. But the difference between him and Mendenhall is that he's got more moves than that. So it's not like
he has a pretty wide toolbox, which is funny, but he just loves the spin.
Yes.
It worked. There was that play.
He's like a kid with a new toy right now.
No, exactly. Like, he did it 3 times in a row, and the third time the ball popped out, he went and dove and got it. It's a perfect encapsulation of who he is. Like, he plays so fast.
Yeah.
And it's almost cartoonish at times, watching him get the corner. It's the backer will have a couple steps on him on an angle, and he just just gets 15 yards down the field before he's even in arm's length. He's just one of those players that's just fun to watch. Yeah. He was probably the most fun I had watching tape because I didn't really know what to expect. I saw him play a bit. I watched the bowl game with him, and we played Penn State, the college football playoff game, and I watched a couple of games from SMU throughout the year, and not really paying too much attention. And I'm always like, this guy's pretty solid. And then I turn the tape, I'm like, oh my goodness, he does things that I'm like, why are you doing this? But it also worked. But just fun player, man. I think he hit the nail on the head. Just the conceptual part of actually playing receiver. I mean, if I graded him as a receiver, he'd have a draftable grade.
Yeah, I think so. And I laugh about the spin thing because the only guy I saw spin more than him was Kyle McCord, the quarterback for Syracuse. I call him tilt-a-whirl because he tilts and he whirls. So, and I'm not sure that's a good thing. But we'll talk more about him down the line. The other backs that I would put in that line of saying, yeah, they're good receiving backs and I have good grades on them. Taj Brooks, Texas Tech.
Okay.
This is someone, is he a downfield receiver? Well, in Texas Tech he is, but he's not likely going to beat any linebackers in the NFL on a regular basis. Najee Harris, you're not asking him to run too many wheel routes. They tried that a couple of times. But, yeah, he beat Patrick Queen on a wheel route when it was Alabama LSU. He's not beating Patrick Queen anymore in Baltimore. And Patrick Queen's playing inside now, so you're not going to see that as often. But he's not beating the outside linebackers that often on that type of stuff. But when you look at what he can do in terms of hand-eye coordination, he really understands how to attack the ball and get downhill fast. And because he's elusive and he's got contact balance, he's going to be one of those Spencer Ware-like pass catchers in the flat on screens who's going to get open on linebackers, and he's going to run through people, and he's going to make multiple people miss or make multiple people miss tackles or do both on the same run. And so he's really good at that, and he's someone that, he's very flexible. He can go high or low, and he tracks the ball well, and he takes hard shots winning the football. And when you combine that with his pass protection prowess, you've got a elite receiver who's going to be able to, you can keep on the field that way. So is he going to get those touches? I mean, probably not. He's going to have to ball out at the combine to really impress people on that end. But I'm going to say this, we'll talk. We're going to be talking about him. I'm going to be talking about him more later on this show. Let me just put it that way. So, but he's certainly on that list for me. And then the third guy that I would say is probably there in terms of, score. Let me make sure I've got this right because I've got some guys pulled up here that fit that. I'm going to say another underrated guy is Woody Marks out of USC.
USC.
Yeah,
tough kid too. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Like he reminds me a little bit of Dalvin Cook. Like there's some isms there with his game that kind of remind me of that. But like as a receiver, he's got very quick reactions with his hands. He's one of those guys that when the quarterback puts the ball on top of you too hot and too fast, no problem. He wins the ball. He is someone that can make the weird, awkward catches that sometimes have to happen. But he's also a guy who can track over the shoulder, and he's good at the boundary. He can give you some of those outside routes if you need it, and he's got the burst to do it. Maybe I think he's got the juice to be able to get down the field that way. He's one of those guys that he's not going to accelerate past cornerbacks and a lot of safeties, but if he gets into the secondary, you're in for a ride. He's going to flip that field 40 to 60 yards before they bring him down or get close to bringing him down because he's going to make you miss. He's going to run through tackles, and he's just fast enough to be a problem. So yeah, I'm a fan of Woody Marks. I think that he's someone that's going to find his way onto a team, and you could see him having a Jerick McKinnon plus role where he's a little more versatile than McKinnon. Maybe not as athletic, but certainly got that, and he's got the NFL toughness and savvy to develop. And so those are the guys. Obviously, we could talk about Jeanty. We're going to talk about him, but we're going to leave him till later. So those are mine. Who do you think's getting overrated? Who's just you're just like I'm not feeling him.
Well, it's kind of funny because the guy I think is overrated. I have him as my second ranked back in the class, and it's Travion Henderson. And I think he's being, I wouldn't even say it's overrated. I think he's being miscast. I think everybody thinks Travion Henderson is a Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Chain, blue chip play speed type. No. He's not that guy. But what he brings to the table is consistency in pass protection and as a receiver. And I think he's very similar to Kyron Williams coming out of Notre Dame, but obviously a plus athlete.
Okay.
And that's not a bad thing because Kyron Williams plays all three downs. And that I think is what's going to endear offense, general managers to his game is you can keep on the field all three downs. He can also hit the home run. And that's going to be a big part of what he does is he can pass protect. He's a good receiver. He can hit the home run as a rusher. Now, does he have a good through contact skill set? No. Is he as versatile from a movement toolbox perspective? No. But he's going to be someone that can stay on the field for three downs, which is important. But also, too, people are thinking he's this super uber dynamic runner who can make you miss and do all these other things. And that's just not who he is. And that's totally okay, right? Kyron Williams has made a great career in the NFL so far, right, in McVay's system. And that's going to be the thing, too, is, we have, like all these guys. Todd McShay's thinking he's might be a first rounder, right? There's people with chatter of him sneaking in the first round. And that is the allure of it is just that. It's, hey, like this guy can be on the field for 3 downs. He can't hit the home run as a receiver and as a rusher, and he's going to keep my quarterback clean. And that's going to be enough for NFL GMs. Is he overrated? Maybe in the sense that I just think he's being miscast, but I also think he's a good player.
Would it be fair to consider maybe? I love the Kyron Williams comp, and I'm stealing some of that and crediting you.
That's okay.
So with that, but the other guy that may be at the top of this chain that I didn't think of is Tony Pollard. If would Tony Pollard be the most evolved archetype version of Travion?
He's the Charizard, yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I think I think in terms of the play speed and he just very linear driven.
Yeah.
Pollard is a linear athlete.
Yeah.
Same with Henderson. Williams isn't really an athlete at all, for being honest. Like, he's just a good football player.
Yeah.
Right. He's available and reliable down to down, and that's enough for McVay and company. But yeah, I think that makes sense as well. It's and I think Pollard wasn't obviously coming in from Memphis and not really being a running back for very long. Him coming in the league and honestly, after a year or two in Dallas, he was better than Zeke Elliott.
So yeah, I mean, when you look at this, I mean, I'm going to agree with you on Henderson as the most overrated player based on relative to the hype that he's getting. But again, it does mean I have him as a more if Tony Pollard is the most evolved back of that archetype, I would say DeAndre Swift is the most well-known, least evolved back of that archetype. Okay. And I would say Henderson's like maybe a better version of DeAndre Swift in that regard. Like, he's a guy that if the play is developed the way it's supposed to between the tackles, Henderson can do damage for you. If there's a little kink in the mix of what is supposed to happen, he doesn't know how to access the toolbox that he might have if he has the tools at all to navigate his way out of it.
That's a really good way to put it. I put in my notes he doesn't have an escape hatch.
Yeah. And
that is pretty correct. And with DeAndre Swift, and it's funny you said that, and I'm a Bears fan, so I painfully watch him every Sunday. There's the cognitive skill set. It's like the fire alarm is going off in his head the whole time.
Yeah.
And he can't calm down and make the correct decision when things are even a little bit muddy. And that's happened from Georgia with DeAndre Swift, and it hasn't slowed down. Even in Philadelphia, when they had an all-world offensive line, didn't slow down.
Because if DeAndre Swift was as good as people thought, Saquon Barkley would never be in Philadelphia.
That is
just look at the. I mean, I hate to say it this simplistically, but look at the yardage difference.
Well, yeah, and then why did Detroit draft a running back in the first round
and give him the boot? Yeah.
Right, and there's reasons. He can't stay on schedule, and that's the thing with Henderson. Henderson can stay on schedule.
Yes.
So that is correct in that there is a bottom of the pyramid, the top of the pyramid of the archetype.
Yep.
And top of the pyramid is probably a Tony Pollard type in terms of your just the ability to hit the home run and also be functional in every other area, which I think could very well be Travion Henderson.
Yes.
And then we have kind of that middle, the lower tier of that is going to be Kyron Williams in terms of being not a great athlete, but also being really conceptually sound.
Yeah.
And then we have the bottom part of it, which I think is DeAndre Swift, because
wind him up and hope he goes straight through the open space.
You're right, 100%.
I mean, look, it's Swift. I think Henderson would. The best way I would describe Henderson right now is what people thought Swift would be.
Sure.
Or maybe a little less. I would say Pollard is what people thought Swift would be. I'd say Henderson is realistically better than Swift, but not quite Tony Pollard. So, sure. The way you're saying it. So, yeah, I think he's a little bit on the overrated side for sure. So, then, who do you feel is getting underrated by the public?
Oh, God. I would probably say Devin Neal.
Yeah,
Out
that's
of
a great
Kansas.
one.
I think he's really freaking good. And if he was in last year's running back class, he would have been the first or second running back in my rankings. Him and Jonathan Brooks would be battling it out. But he's one of those guys in the open field. He kind of actually does. He has a mechanism in his game. Very, very big on left foot led plants. It reminds me of DeAndre Swift when he came out of Georgia, and just the ability to just explode out of that and just enter initial acceleration again, and just bait everyone towards his outside shoulder, and then just explode upfield. He's in much better control than Swift, I would say. This is not the bash DeAndre Swift show, but I mean, I'll be honest. Like, I had DeAndre Swift graded in like an 80th percentile or so.
Sure, I had a high grade for him.
Prospect.
Sure,
but anyways, with Neal, I think it's one of those where this is such a good running back class that a guy like him is going to fall, and then we all might be like, "Holy cow, how did this guy fall?" And he just offers you so much as a functional piece of an offense, but also to a dynamic piece. Like, marrying the function and the dynamic part of it is really important to play running back at a high level, and he does that really well. And I think you can watch his tape and kind of see that too. He can do whatever you need him to do at the position. He's just not a mega athlete, which is okay. But he's someone I think we're not valuing high enough and talking as much as we should be about.
Nice. I'm going to give two guys, and then I'm going to ask another question for you to think about that I didn't have on our program.
Sure.
It just came to mind, which is start thinking about what you see is what you get. Like, like whoever drafts him, they're gonna get exactly what they think they see out of him, and that could be a really good thing, but it just may not be. It's just lunch-pail type of player. Like, it's probably not going to get much better, but it's going to be it's going to be good enough. So, but yeah. The underrated guys, obviously Taj Brooks. I think Taj Brooks is, I think the low end of his equation is C.J. Anderson, as you mentioned, and Chris Brooks, who I liked, a couple years ago. I think he's in that realm. He's a better receiver than those two guys. I think he is a more imaginative runner than those two guys. He has very good quick. I won't be surprised if he doesn't have really good quick twitch skills. And if he has the level of timed short area quickness that I think he's going to have, then he's going to be closer to the upper end of my comp than I think most people will believe or agree with, and that's Le'Veon Bell. I think he runs a lot like Le'Veon Bell, and I liked Le'Veon Bell coming out, and he was a guy that one of the guys I used to brag about when I would market the RSP because of the way that I scouted him. And I think that this is the type of kid with his contact balance, the way he runs, and the way they let him run. That's the big thing, is that you got to have a team that allows you to run like that. And there aren't many teams in the NFL that may allow you to do that. But I would joke that his nickname should be Lemonade Stand, because he turns lemon plays into lemonade at Texas Tech like it's a business, and he's already putting himself through school with it. He is functionally, he is very creative. He is excellent contact balance. He can run through you, run over you, run around you. He can set up blocks and make blockers look better. He can create when there aren't any blockers. He's an extremely good escape hatch runner. And I think that the big question will be, when they put him in an environment where he doesn't need to press the escape hatch button, will he be pressing it to the same amount of time that our man Rashad Smith is going to push the B button to spin? Or is he going to show us that he's like, I had to run like this, kind of like Isaiah Pacheco? Because when I scouted Isaiah Pacheco, I was like, look, he couldn't even, his backside guard or his pulling guard couldn't even reach the hole. He sometimes had to shove the dude into the hole just so that he could create off of it. or he had to run ahead of it because he knew it's a short yardage play. I just need a yard. I don't need him to. I need to wait on him and risk losing 2 or 3. And I think that I joked in my scouting report that like Isaiah Pacheco is going to get in the league, and there's going to be at least one small segment of his play where he's going to look and go, "Oh my God, my offensive line can block for me. This is easier than playing at Rutgers." And not saying football as a whole, just running behind linemen that go, "Oh, the hole's supposed to be there, and it's there." Like, wait a minute. And I think that Brooks is going to have a little bit of that. And I think he's a guy that could legitimately surprise. I mean, he's 5'10", 230, and he's quick. And I like those big, quick-footed backs who can keep you on schedule, and they can do it through rain, sleet, snow, or incompetent offensive line. And I think he's that dude.
Love that.
Yeah. So who's your lunch pail guy? Like, you're just like, look, what you see is what you get. There's probably no upside for this kid beyond what I've seen, but that's okay.
Oh God, I probably have 2 lunch pail guys.
Okay,
I would say at the position. Number 1, I think he's going to be drafted in the early 2nd round, and that's Amarian Hampton.
There you go.
I think he's one of those guys where, look, he's not overly exciting. He's exciting if you like the little details.
Right.
But he's one of those guys that's going to have an 8 to 10 year career potentially, because he doesn't make mistakes as a runner. And he does things through contact that you'd want him to do at his size, and he's going to offer value immediately to a backfield as someone in the low red zone. And that's going to be probably his calling card, I think, in the league, is he's going to be someone who scores a boatload of touchdowns because he's proficient there and very, very good at recognizing defender leverage and playing off of that in the requisite fashion. I'd say my other guy, Trevor Etienne, very much not like his brother Travis, because Travis was a freaking cannonball.
Right.
Like, you just pray. And I think Travis Etienne's career has gone an odd trajectory because he was a first rounder and just had hard time staying healthy. But also, too, he never really added that second layer to his game. Great accelerator, but that was really it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's not really another conceptual piece to Travis Etienne, but Trevor Etienne is literally the opposite, where it's everything is adequate, nothing above, nothing that far below, but everything is just good enough to provide you a spot starter, probably a tertiary option in most cases, but could be a secondary guy in some offenses and some backfields. But yeah, those would be my guys, I would say, in this class for sure.
Yeah. I think I like Etienne as a guy that I think at Georgia, I don't think Georgia he was fine, but I don't think he was great. At Florida, I thought he sizzled at Florida.
Better Florida, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I agree with you. I think he's someone who can give you some explosive plays, not maybe breakaway plays, but explosive plays. Like, I would say, like, the low end of him is Woody Marks, but he's the higher end version of Woody Marks right now, in some regards, with his game. There's some things that they do, at least in the open field, footwork wise, what they can do catching the football, and I think the way you described him is great. Now, going back to my second underrated guy that I forgot is Jarquez Hunter of Auburn.
Yeah.
I watched this dude, and I think there's more that could be there with him. He's a little limited by his scheme. But when you watch this dude run at 5'10", 210, he's a cannonball. when he needs to be. He can be a cannonball, and he has contact balance. And he is it's almost like when you watch him, the thing is he's played multiple years, but you watch him at Auburn and you kind of feel like he's like Brashard Smith, still feeling his way to learning the position. But what he does, there's some things you look at and you go, it's like looking at some dude who's like just naturally skilled in some way, like a wrestler who's got tremendous balance but doesn't know the techniques yet on how to do it. But because he's in great shape, he's got great quickness, and he's got like preternatural balance, you just look at him and go, wow, there's some moments that are just breathtaking with him, and you just laugh and go, how did he get through that? How did he do that? But you know that there's more to learn. So yeah, lunch pail guys wise, I'm gonna say Damian Martinez. I think he is totally, look, 6 feet, 225. I almost think it's going to be counterintuitive. I think people are going to let him slide, and they're going to be like, they're going to question something. There's going to be multiple questions, and they're going to nitpick things and say, maybe he's not quite quick enough. Maybe he's not going to be able to do what he did at Oregon State and Miami in the league. Maybe he's just not. I think this is a dude, you can give him 20 touches, and it may not be the most dynamic 20 touches you've seen, but it might be mid-career Corey Dillon type of stuff where he slowed down some, or late career Corey Dillon where he slowed down some, but he will run through you, and he's got better feet than you imagine. He can definitely be efficient. He catches the ball very well. So where you use him, if he can stay in great shape, he could be the James Conner of this class. The guy who's like a little more nimble than you think. People are going to write him off when he has a bad game because his offensive line isn't good. May travel somewhere else. And if he keeps staying in shape, they're going to go, how did this guy make it to 30 and he's still pumping out great years?
I can definitely see it. It's kind of funny because, so when you watch Miami play with like Mario Cristobal and obviously Cam Ward, I'm like, what? They played Mark Fletcher way too much, which is number 4, and I'm like, that's ridiculous. But Martinez looked great. I mean, he looked great at Oregon State. He's one of those guys that's going to be a good fit in the NFL offense, just like we talked about with Cam Scattaboo. Yeah, it's just like you need the energy givers. Like, these guys endear themselves to a locker rooms plural, and are always going to have jobs. Like, Jamal Williams isn't very good anymore, but he's going to have he's going to have another contract if he gets let go from the Saints. Yeah. And that's just kind of how it works.
Yeah. I think another guy that I don't want, this could have spawned a different question, and if you want to answer this one with your guy like this, we can kind of make this the same question of lunch pail guy, or guy that you hope doesn't become what you see is what you get, because you just hope there's a little more there, but you think you're hoping against hope. And that guy for me is Kyle Monangai of Rutgers. Sure. I want this guy so badly to be like more Ray Rice, Devonta Freeman like in both ranges of the game, and I think he can be closer to Devonta Freeman. But he's a good runner. He's just a good runner, but he doesn't have a receiving game right now. And when you're 5'9", 210 at best, I don't even know if he's gonna be that when he comes in. I wouldn't be surprised if he's 5'8", 200, when they measure him. But like he's a smart runner, he's creative. He runs through contact extraordinarily well. He's just tough as nails. He's a creator and like the anchor for that team, that offense. And I look at how he plays, and I just think, okay, that's a guy that I want to be better, him to be better than maybe he is. And I haven't graded him to be better than who he is, but he's good enough that you look at him and go, It's just a little bit more, guy. Just a little bit more, please. And it's like the same thing would be the case for me with Phil Maffa.
Oh yeah, from Clemson. Yeah.
Yes, I mean 6'1", 230. He looks like he could be pretty fast. I want him to be like Leonard Fournette, Stephen Davis, but it's just not. It's not there, not yet, and I don't know if it will be. It's like good enough to be on the field, good enough to do a number of things for you, but it's also like I remember another back out of Clemson who, and I can't remember his name to save my life, but a scout I remember loved him. Not loved him, but liked him the way I like Phil Maffa. And he's the kid who played with the Giants for a little while, who was out of Clemson, who was not super fast, but they played him for a time. I'm sure I can find it if I look, but
how long ago?
Maybe in the past 10 years, and the name is just on the
Sure.
tip of my tongue, and I can't remember. But he's like, 215, about 215 pounds. He played in the Giants, kind of a straight line-ish dude. Could pass protect, could catch, had decent feet, but you thought just never quite got better, And I think he was with the 49ers for a cup of coffee, but never really did much with them. But, if you Google Clemson running back New York Giants, I bet you'll find it because I don't think there's been a running back with the Giants since. So Google him up, and I would say that would be I'm pretty sure that's going to be the guy. And I'm afraid Maffa's going to turn into this guy in terms of not like the skill sets are different, but like just end up being a career backup and occasionally gets in a game.
Okay. Yeah. I could definitely see that because I like Maffa a lot when I watched Will Shipley.
Yeah.
And just a good player, right? Man, mine's probably Jordan James.
Yeah.
I want him to be really good because he's really fun to watch run.
Yes.
Like a little bit of Isaiah Pacheco in him too. I think a little better feel, but I just don't know if he has the depth of skill to stick. I think that's the most difficult part about playing running back now is if you don't have depth of skill, your high-end trait better be really high-end.
Yeah.
So, and that's the tough thing is I don't know if he has that, but I mean, I think he's a tough kid, fun player to watch. Was really productive at Oregon. I liked him initially when I watched Bucky Irving too. That was a big one, but I think he's definitely that guy. And then the second one, RJ Harvey.
Oh yeah, I can see that.
I like RJ Harvey a lot. I think he could be a contributor, but I think that's kind of where it might stop. When you look at guys who have long-term careers in the NFL as starters, that's hard to find. Yeah. Like really hard to find. If you go back from like 2019, there's not very many guys who are still starters in the league. Not very many at all. And so that's the tough thing is I don't know if he's in that category from a talent perspective. I like him. I like watching him play. He's explosive, good in open areas, but I don't know if he has the high-end talents to be a starter for multiple years. I think he could be a career contributor, kind of like a Devin Singletary type, where he just bounces around for a bit and isn't super fancy, but can be a reliable piece. Did you find the Clemson guy?
I did, and I have a funny coincidence with it too. It's Wayne Gallman.
Oh yes.
Yeah, Wayne Gallman, 4th round pick. The funny thing about him is that him and Phil Maffa both went to Clemson. Him and Phil Maffa are both from the same hometown of Loganville, Georgia.
Get out.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny that he reminded. I had no idea, but that made me laugh because I was like, he reminds me just how his career might turn out.
Thumbs in the water.
Yeah, maybe it's in the water. Where's Loganville? That's the joke about that town because there was a commercial that there was a car company and it was located in Loganville and they have some guy going, "Where's Loganville?" So, yeah, those two guys. All right, so let's get to the big question here, the grand finale, and that's Ashton Jeanty. What is he for the NFL, or what are the ranges of what he could be for the
Okay.
NFL.
I think he is going to be what we all wanted J.K. Dobbins to be. I think that's kind of where I land with him. I think the upside is Maurice Jones-Drew. I think Maurice Jones-Drew was an All-Pro, right? He was phenomenal. I think Jeanty has that in his range of outcomes. Here goes this: he's going to walk into an NFL offense and receive 18 to 22 touches a game. He's probably going to be the leader in the pack in the rookie of the year race, and he's probably going to be deserving as so. Right. I think he's a really good player, man. I mean, just even watching him play in 23, when I turned on Boise State, his skill set as a receiver is, I think, much broader than people think it is, because he didn't do that much work there in 24 compared to 23. But for me, it's just like you mentioned it too, the run stamina, the ability to make moves, be fluid, but also explosive down the field in succession through contact, and just layer those together, seemingly run after run. That's the stuff I think that's, I don't say the word special ever. That's a special trait. You don't see that ever. That's a really tough one to see. You don't see it often. But he's one of those guys I think that's going to be a potential top 12 pick, deserves it. Yeah, I think the high end of that is going to be Maurice Jones-Drew, and then I have that middle tier, probably more probable is what we wanted J.K. Dobbins to be. Because if we saw a full-fledged J.K. Dobbins, that's still a Pro Bowl All-Pro player.
That's a guy who you could have argued is as good or better than Jonathan Taylor. I would argue as a running back. Yeah, that's where I had him, was just slightly above Jonathan Taylor, 1 and 2. And I'm so glad you said J.K. Dobbins, because that's a guy I had him comp to as well. I thought Javid Best for a while, but as I started looking at the run stamina and looking at some of those types of things, I was talking with my friend Alex, and we were talking about J.K. Dobbins and him as a comp. And it was funny because he goes, most of my friends who are just like, casual listeners and fantasy folks, when they hear J.K. Dobbins, they go, I don't want to pick a guy who's going to get hurt, or that guy's
sure.
not, they don't think of how special J.K. Dobbins really is as a player to be in the situation that he is right now. I mean, what he did this past year off of...
Remarkable.
Yeah.
Absolutely remarkable.
Yeah. He's a stud. So it's... Ashton Jeanty definitely has a lot of J.K. Dobbins to his game, and maybe a little bit more. And I was in love with J.K. Dobbins as a player. So, I love it. I think he can be... That run stamina is special, and there's just something about him. When you watch special backs or backs who are really good, like high-end really good, who have his types of skill sets, it just seems like no one ever gets a clean hit on him. And so it's like, it's not the brute force of Earl Campbell or Steven Jackson or early Leonard Fournette, but it's like Walter Payton. You saw occasionally him getting hits that were crazy for him to handle at his size, which is Ashton Jeanty's size. But he also, if you go back and study a lot of those games, or you go back and look as far back as like Jim Brown. I want to study Jim Brown's tape just to see as much as I could study. And what you saw with guys like that is that it looked like they were running through massive contact. And then when you look at it again, you realize that their movements were so subtle that the contact was never quite as bad, as damaging as you would have expected in full time. And it's the same thing with, like, that's top tier Ezekiel Elliott. It was the same thing when Elliott was at the top of his game, is all these little micro movements that they have. It just mitigates the impact of the contact, and they can either avoid it or run through it.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, you said something that's really impactful, is mitigating the context. That's really the most important part about, being a really good through contact back, is mitigating contact and not letting it metastasize and add up. because you're expected to take, if you're a back of Jeanty's caliber, 300-ish touches plus a year. That is very different from back to back, right? There's, let's say, like a David Montgomery. Holy cow, he gets hit hard. He hits hard. Hard to see Montgomery at this stage in his career staying on the field for all 17, right? But there's backs in this league. Derrick Henry is one too, where bigger back, but all the blows are glancing.
Yeah.
Everything is mitigated. He's not running over dudes, but all the blows are mitigated.
Yeah.
And that's a really, really big deal. Bijan Robinson's a huge one in today's game too, where I've never seen Bijan Robinson just get blown up.
Yeah.
And that's a really impactful trade if you're someone who's looking to make a career out of being a professional running back and making it to 30, 32 years old.
And there's a back who I just realized who's going to be at the top end of my scale for Ashton Jeanty, because he was the master at this at around the same size, maybe even a little lighter, and that was Jamal Charles.
Yeah.
Jamal Charles, when you watch Jamal Charles and one of the things that he did so well, and I can't believe I used to write about this at length all the time and compare it at time. And it's been a while now since he's been out of the league, so I just kind of forgotten about it conveniently. But Jeanty, when Jeanty hits a crease, he does something that I saw Charles do in college all the time. And that's that when he's got a one-on-one in a crease and there's a defensive tackle or a linebacker who's getting clean of his block and has his chest open, Jeanty will be the first to hit. And all the good backs do this, but when you have the quickness and agility to do what I'm going to mention next, that puts you at that next tier. And that's that the best backs dictate the contact, because if you, and really any football player, any football interaction you look at that involves collisions, the winner usually is the one who dictates the contact or is really good at countering and resetting the order of the interaction, because you need to dictate the interaction. So you either dictate it or you can counter it enough to then reset it and dictate it yourself. And what Charles would do well is when that linebacker or defensive tackle would get open to be able to wrap or hit, Charles would attack first, and he would deliver the stiff arm so that he got a nice solid punch into the chest first, or a pad into the chest first. I mean, like, accelerate into the contact and time it perfectly so that as soon as the strike happened, he's already spinning off of it. If he's hit stiff arming, he's already getting his feet high. You look at Alvin Kamara, who's the closest relative to, him and LaShawn McCoy that we have left in terms of contact balance at that size and range, and you see that he dictates terms like that. And so when he does these Gumby-like oddball bends and runs through contact, you go, how did he do that? And it's like this mystical thing. It's because when he gets the contact, then the defender has to react to that contact, and while he's reacting, you're already making your second move.
Right, and that's a big deal, because for Kamara, it's a great example, because nothing was stiff when you got hit. There was no strain when he got hit, and that's why he's able to chain those movements together. It's just it's a pretty simple contractile element, right? If I'm making a fist and trying to punch someone as hard as I can, and contracting as hard as I can, there's no relaxation, so my muscles can't relax and contract very quickly. So Kamara, when he gets hit, he's relaxing.
Yeah,
that's why they tell you, if you're in a car accident, relax. Have you heard that before?
Yes.
That's why, because when you are relaxing, you can essentially dictate the terms of the engagement much better. But if you are straining and preparing for the contact, you're basically absorbing all of those forces instead of basically mitigating those forces or repurposing them, which is what Kamara does extremely well. And Jeanty and Charles and
Yeah.
McCoy need to go back.
Even Marshawn Lynch, like if you're going to hit, you're going to put all your force into the hit. You're going to attack. But if you know the attack is coming, oftentimes with all those backs, what you'd also see is they get hit in the legs or in the hip, and suddenly it's almost like they just slide laterally and still keep their feet, you know? And it's because they relaxed enough that they didn't topple over. The energy went through them, and they could maintain their alignment to where they landed on their feet. Nick Chubb did that well too. And then they just continue to move forward, whether it's on one foot or another. It's almost like they displaced their feet with the hit. It's like they're hit, and then somehow they land, and it's still on one foot, and they just continue going. It's like, so yeah, Jeanty definitely has that. I wasn't sure. I was ready to say, okay, this guy's easily the top back in this class, but I think he's easily the top back in this class after watching that, especially with the run stamina, because that was Marshawn Lynch all day right there on that level, just in a 206-pound package. Different style runner, but definitely has some of the elements you want from special guys. So,
yes, love it.
Yeah. So listen, special show, had lots of fun. We gave you, 120 minutes of nonstop RB talk. Look, you know where to find us. You know where to find us if you're listening to this. And if you want to support what we do, you know where to go. Do it. Because, we don't have ads. It's straight talk. We're not advertising some sort of cockamamie thing that, like, you're never going to wear, you're never going to use, and we're not going to try and bait you and say that women are going to go to bed with you because of it, or that your wife's going to like you more, or that you're going to get bigger, stronger, faster sooner, or that you're going to drop 60 pounds in 3 weeks and get washboard abs. We're just going to tell you that we're going to give you good analysis, and you can buy our work. Okay? Thanks again. Have a good night.